They called it the Flying Fortress, but fortresses are supposed to protect the people inside. This one became a flying coffin for tens of thousands of young men. Between 1943 and 1945, the B-17 had a 60% casualty rate. That means if you climbed into one of these bombers, you had better odds of dying or getting maimed than making it home. The United States Army Air Forces lost 4,750 B-17s in combat. That is not a typo. 4,750 bombers shot out of the sky, each one carrying 10 young Americans who believed this fortress would keep them safe. This is not a story about heroes, though there were plenty. This is a story about a machine that became a symbol of American might while simultaneously becoming a death sentence for the boys trapped inside it. The B-17 Flying Fortress was born from desperation and delusion. In 1934, the United States Army Air Corps was a joke. The country had fewer than 1,500 military aircraft, most of them obsolete biplanes that belonged in a museum. Meanwhile, Nazi Germany was secretly building the Luftwaffe, Japan was militarizing the Pacific, and Europe was sleepwalking toward another world war. American military planners saw the writing on the wall. They needed a bomber that could strike deep into enemy territory, defend itself against fighter attacks, and return home safely. The problem was nobody had ever built anything like that before. Boeing Aircraft Company took the gamble. In 1935, they unveiled the Model 299, the prototype that would become the B-17. When it rolled onto the airfield at Boeing Field in Seattle, reporters gasped. It was enormous, bristling with 5 machine gun positions, powered by 4 massive engines. One journalist looked at all those gun barrels and said it looked like a flying fortress. The name stuck. Boeing executives loved it. The Army loved it. Everybody loved it. There was just one tiny problem. The prototype crashed during its evaluation flight, killing the crew. That should have been an omen. It was not. The crash happened because the crew forgot to remove the control surface locks, a rookie mistake that had nothing to do with the aircraft design. So the Army pushed forward, ordering 13 more for testing. By 1939, as Hitler invaded Poland, the B-17 entered limited production. When Pearl Harbor was bombed in December 1941, America went into total war production mode. Boeing factories started churning out B-17 bombers as fast as humanly possible. Vega and Douglas joined the effort, building B-17 bombers under license. By the end of the war, they had produced 12,731 flying fortresses. It was an industrial miracle. It was also the beginning of a slaughter. The B-17 looked invincible on paper. 4 Wright Cyclone engines, generating 1,200 horsepower each, a top speed of 287 miles per hour, a service ceiling of 35,000 feet, a range of 2,000 miles with a 4,500-pound bomb load. And those guns. Oh, those guns. 13 .50 caliber machine guns, bristling from every angle. The nose, the tail, the waist, the belly, the top turret. The flying fortress could supposedly defend itself against any fighter attack. That was the theory. The reality was very different. Here is what they did not tell the crews climbing into these bombers. The B-17 was not actually a fortress. It was a thin-skinned aluminum tube filled with fuel, bombs, and oxygen, flying through skies full of German fighters and flak cannons designed to blow it apart. Those 13 machine guns sounded impressive until you realized German fighters attacked from the front, where early B-17 models had almost no defensive armament. The armor plating was inadequate. The self-sealing fuel tanks helped, but they could not stop cannon shells. And that 35,000-foot ceiling? It sounded great, except at that altitude, temperatures dropped to 60 degrees below zero. The oxygen was so thin, men passed out and frostbite was guaranteed. The 8th Air Force, based in England, learned these lessons the hard way. In 1942, they started flying daylight bombing raids deep into occupied Europe and Germany. American doctrine said bombers flying in tight formation could defend themselves without fighter escorts. The British, who had already tried daylight bombing and been massacred, warned the Americans this was suicide. The Americans did not listen. They believed in the flying fortress. The first few missions went okay. Then the Luftwaffe figured out the B-17's weaknesses. German pilots realized the nose was at the vulnerable spot, so they started making head-on attacks, coming straight at the bombers at 400 miles per hour, firing cannons and machine guns, then diving away before the B-17 gunners could track them. It was brutally effective. B-17 crews watched German fighters flash past, felt the impacts as cannon shells punched through the nose, and saw the bombardier and navigator turned into hamburger. The pilots and co-pilots sat there helpless, knowing they might be next, unable to do anything but hold formation and pray. The numbers tell the story. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched a double strike. 376 B-17s attacked the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt factory in Regensburg. The Luftwaffe swarmed them. By the end of the day, 60 B-17s were shot down. That is 600 men gone in one mission. Another 95 bombers came back so badly damaged they would never fly again. Hundreds more crewmen were wounded. The 8th Air Force lost 30% of its striking force in a single day. They had to go back to Schweinfurt again in October. That second mission cost another 77 bombers. The crews started calling these raids one-way tickets. Inside the B-17 during combat was hell. The temperature was so cold that exposed skin froze to metal instantly. The oxygen masks froze to faces. The 50 caliber machine guns jammed from the cold, and gunners had to piss on them to thaw them out. The bombers flew in tight formation through flak fields, explosions bracketing them, shrapnel tearing through aluminum skin. German fighters made pass after pass. Tracer rounds lit up the sky. Wounded men screamed over the intercom. Dead men slumped in their positions. Blood froze on the floor. Bomber crews were supposed to fly 25 missions before they could go home. 25 missions over Germany, where the Luftwaffe and flak batteries waited to kill you, where even minor damage could doom your aircraft, where mechanical failure meant death. The odds of surviving 25 missions in 1943 were roughly 25%. That means 3 out of 4 crews did not make it. They died, got shot down and captured, or got so badly wounded they could not fly anymore. Some men cracked mentally before their tour ended, catatonic with fear, unable to climb back into the bomber. The Air Force called it lack of moral fiber. Today we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. The B-17 crews were not cowards. They were kids, most of them between 19 and 25 years old. They came from farms and cities all across America. They volunteered. They wanted to fight. They believed in the mission. They climbed into those bombers day after day, knowing the odds, watching their friends die, seeing empty bunks in the barracks, and they kept flying. That takes courage. Most people cannot even imagine. But courage does not stop cannon shells. Bravery does not make aluminum armor. Guts do not bring dead men back. The only thing that saved the crews of the B-17 was the P-51 Mustang. In late 1943, the Mustang entered service as a long-range escort fighter. It could fly all the way to Berlin and back, protecting the bombers the whole way. German fighters suddenly had to contend with American fighters, instead of just shooting bombers like fish in a barrel. The casualty rates dropped. By mid-1944, missions that would have been suicide a year earlier became survivable. The Mustang, not the Flying Fortress, won the air war over Germany. But even with fighter escorts, the B-17 remained dangerous. Flak was the bigger killer anyway. German anti-aircraft batteries put up walls of exploding steel. thousands of shells bursting at precise altitudes, filling the sky with shrapnel. B-17 bombers had to fly straight and level on their bomb runs, with no evasive maneuvers, making them perfect targets. Flak tore through formations, ripping off wings, puncturing fuel tanks, killing men instantly. Some bombers exploded mid-air. Others fell out of formation, trailing fire and smoke. Crews bailed out if they were lucky. Others went down with the ship if they were not. The B-17 did accomplish its mission. The strategic bombing campaign devastated German war production. Factories got flattened, oil refineries burned, transportation networks collapsed, cities turned to rubble. The Luftwaffe got ground down to nothing, forced to defend Germany instead of supporting ground troops. By 1945, the Allies owned the skies over Europe. But that victory cost 47,000 American airmen dead or missing. That is more than the entire United States Marine Corps lost in World War II. The 8th Air Force alone lost 26,000 men. Most of them died in B-17s. Here is the part that makes this story truly dark. The Air Force knew the B-17 was not as survivable as they claimed. They knew the armor was inadequate. They knew fighters were essential for protection. They knew the casualty rates were horrific. But they kept sending boys into those bombers anyway, because winning the war required it. The strategic bombing campaign was deemed necessary to break German industry and morale. So young men climbed into flying fortresses day after day, knowing many would not return, and the generals who sent them accepted those losses as the price of victory. There were modifications. After the Schweinfurt disasters, Boeing added a chin turret with 2 machine guns to defend against frontal attacks. They improved the armor. They made incremental changes. But fundamentally, the B-17 remained what it always was, a bomber that could take tremendous punishment but could not adequately protect its crew from determined enemy action. Some B-17s made it back to England with catastrophic damage. One engine out, half the tail shot away, gaping holes in the fuselage, hydraulics gone, landing gear stuck. Those stories became legendary, proof of the Flying Fortress's toughness. But for every bomber that limped home, others exploded or crashed. The mythology around the B-17 started during the war and never stopped. Hollywood made it a hero. Veterans wrote memoirs celebrating the aircraft. Museums put immaculate examples on display, polished and perfect. The Flying Fortress became an icon of American air power, a symbol of the greatest generation's courage and sacrifice. All of that is true, but it is also incomplete. The B-17 was a death trap that killed tens of thousands of young men. Both things can be true simultaneously. After the war ended, most B-17s went straight to the scrapyard. They were obsolete, too slow, too vulnerable, replaced by jets and missiles. A few survived as transports, fire bombers, reconnaissance aircraft. Today, only a handful remain airworthy. They tour the country, giving rides to people who want to experience a piece of history. The old bombers are beautiful, gleaming aluminum, 4 radial engines roaring. But when you climb inside, you realize how cramped it was, how thin the skin is, how exposed the gunner positions are. You imagine flying this thing through flak and fighters, and you understand what those boys went through. The legacy of the B-17 is complicated. It did its job. The strategic bombing campaign worked, though historians still debate whether it shortened the war or just killed hundreds of thousands of civilians along with military targets. The Flying Fortress crews showed incredible bravery. They deserve every bit of honor they receive. But we also need to acknowledge what the B-17 actually was. It was not an impregnable fortress. It was a bomber that sacrificed crew survivability for payload and range. It was a weapon that won battles while grinding up the men inside it. The final lesson of the B-17 is harsh. In war, there are no perfect weapons. Every aircraft, every tank, every ship is a compromise, trading strengths for weaknesses. The B-17 could carry bombs deep into Germany, That capability required 4 engines, heavy structure, and fuel capacity that left little room for adequate armor or defensive armament. The crews paid the price for those compromises with their lives and their sanity. Today, the B-17 sits in museums, a monument to American ingenuity and courage. That is appropriate. But when you look at that gleaming aluminum bomber, remember the boys who flew it. Remember the 60% casualty rate. Remember the 4,750 bombers shot down. Remember the 47,000 dead airmen. Remember that Fortress was a name, not a guarantee. The B-17 Flying Fortress helped win World War II. It also became a coffin for tens of thousands of young Americans who trusted it to keep them safe. Both truths matter. Both deserve to be remembered. Glory and tragedy, intertwined forever in the story of the Flying Fortress.